This is Strawberry Kiwi Smoothie by Bonus Points. We're on lo-fi. We're keeping lo-fi poso going this week. All right, let's get it started. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome aboard today's edition of Poso Nation. Folks, what is a Maidan? What was the Maidan? Is this a Maidan? What are color revolutions? Do you know what color revolutions are? What is a Maidan? Is there anyone within the sound of my voice who's watching this who knows what a color revolution is? All right. The internet defines a color revolution as a term that's widely used by multimedia to describe various related movements that developed in several countries of the former USSR, China, and the Balkans in the early 2000s. The term is also applied to revolutions elsewhere, including the Middle East and the Asia-Pacific region. Some observers, including Justin Raimondo and Michael Lind, have referred to the event as a revolutionary wave. All right. If you have not studied the work of Michael Lind, right, who wrote the seminal book on fourth generation warfare, right, and everyone who's read my book 4D Warfare knows that what I did in 4D Warfare is modeled Lind's work, but applied it to politics and applied it to social media. That Michael Lind has referred to this as a revolutionary wave. Now, this has been going on now for 20 years, right? And it's mostly been confined, and it's not necessarily geographically confined. However, it hasn't yet occurred in North America, right? It hasn't yet occurred in North America. We've seen these across China. We've seen these in Myanmar. We've seen these in Egypt. We saw the Arab Spring. We saw the Green Movement in Iran. I believe it was 2009, but which was not able to take off. We saw that, and of course the Maidan was the main one. Now, the Maidan was actually the second color revolution of Ukraine. So Euromaidan, which took place in 2013, was actually the second color revolution. The first was the Orange Revolution in 2004. That was the Orange Revolution in 2004. And so the question then becomes, do these protests, do these uprisings constitute a similar type of movement here in the United States? And my answer to that is not yet. My answer to that is not yet. It hasn't yet gotten to the stage where we're at a Maidan situation. It hasn't yet become one of these revolutions. I wouldn't yet add it to this list, which began all the way back in 1986 with the Yellow Revolution in the Philippines. We've also seen, I'm just looking at the list, Coconut Revolution, Velvet Revolution, the Bulldozer Revolution of Yugoslavia, the Rose, and of course we know what that Yugoslavia, everything that happened with the breakup there, the Rose Revolution, the Second Rose Revolution, the Tulip Revolution in Kyrgyzstan. And the list goes on and on. The list goes on and on. So we're not quite there. We're not quite there yet. And the reason is this, because there's so many disparate groups that are attempting to catalyze this situation, and the goals of the stated groups are not there. There's no leaders of this, right? There's no actual organization. There's no hierarchy. There's no list of demands, right? There isn't even necessarily a stated goal for them yet. I mean, it's one thing to say when you have celebrities like Dwayne Johnson saying, well, we need equality. Or so, do you support equality? Do we need more equality? And I'd say, okay, yeah, sure. That's absolutely, yeah. Equality, 100%, love it. But what does that mean? Right? What does that mean? That's not a specific political goal. It's not a specific goal. I don't mean politics in this sense. I'm talking like Republican versus Democrat. I'm talking what kind of reform do you want? Do you want to see police reform? Do you want to see more body cams? Do you want Fitbits that can monitor different physiological functions of police officers and suspects? Do you want reforms to how police restrain someone who's resisting arrest, as has been reported? So what does it mean, right? What does it all mean? And also, we saw the Cultural Revolution in the 1960s in China. I wrote about the Cultural Revolution in my book, 4D Warfare. I talked about that. I was very clear about that. That what was going, and 2 years ago when I wrote my book, 4D Warfare, I compared what Antifa and I compared what various other neo-Maoist groups were doing in the and not just the United States, Canada, and Western Europe, as the Red Guards of the Cultural Revolution, right? And what did the Cultural Revolution stand for? The Cultural Revolution in China of the 1960s and 70s, of course, Hollywood won't touch this. Every college, every university in the country was shut down, every school was shut down, and the denouncements. This was key, the denouncements of it, the denouncing of history, the destruction of history, the taking down of monuments, and also the denouncement, the academic denouncement of history. Look at what we're seeing now with Project 1619. Right, Project 1619, which seeks to undo the founding, to intellectually undo the founding of the United States. The United States. And so when we look to the Red Guards, they then started denouncing anyone who was not for the revolution. And so if you were not for the revolution, you were described as a counter-revolutionary. And if you were a counter-revolutionary, you had to go through a struggle section if you committed an act that was considered to be counter-revolutionary in nature, which meant a struggle session, a public struggle session, where you had to publicly admit your crime, you had to name yourself, and the mob had to name you, and then you had to publicly admit shame and publicly repudiate yourself for your crime. And in some cases, actually, I have the book right here. I'll read. I'm going to read from this. All right? I'm going to read from this. Hold on. Wow. So I literally wrote this 2 years ago. All right, listen to this. The regime set out to uncover new enemies. The regime set out to uncover new enemies by scrutinizing the history and conduct of every adult in the nation. Consider how they were scrutinizing the conduct of every adult in the nation. Think about that the next time you open up Google or Facebook and are asked if you really want to share your data and share your location. Do you really want to share your personal data when you know about what can happen when they later decide to scrutinize your history, your old posts, your old tweets, your old pictures, right? The number of people labeled official outcasts. So you were considered an official outcast in China. That ran to 23 million people. Listen to this. Wrote this 2 years ago. People stopped going to work. The economy was seriously interrupted. Industries were shuttered in order to force people to engage in what were called struggle sessions. Even in the totalitarian state, an element of anarchy crept in. One of the party members gave Mao's travel schedules to a student who fancied himself a detective. He was able to trail Mao covertly around the country. Although both the student and the party member were soon discovered and arrested, such a complete lapse in security had never before taken place. Suicide skyrocketed. Hold on. What Chairman Mao did was to radicalize the youth to the point where they could commit violence against the authorities, violence against their parents, violence against their leaders, against their own families, and against their own mothers and fathers. He radicalized the youth to the point where violence didn't matter. They were told it wasn't violence. Sure, the elderly also got involved. A lot of people got involved. But the radicalization of the youth is a really big part of this evil. You had students in schools killing their own principals. Suicide skyrocketed in Chairman Mao's Cultural Revolution because people were overcome with fear. Had they ever done anything or said anything or spoken out against Chairman Mao or the revolution? Had they ever said anything against communism or what was going on in their country that somebody might remember? If you were labeled right-wing during that time, you were dead. If you were labeled right-wing during the Cultural Revolution, it didn't matter what you said, it didn't matter what your evidence was, it didn't matter what your issues were. You were dead. You were just straight up dead. You were tortured. You were put in front of a crowd, including your own family. Then you would be made to apologize and repudiate yourself in front of all these people. This is what took place at these, quote, struggle sessions. You would be put out in front of everybody, and then, potentially, you would be killed. You would be shot right in front of everyone, and then they would make your parents or family pay for the bullets. This was called the bullet tax at the time. What these forces are riling up is, these are the dark forces of nihilism. Atheistic, materialistic nihilism that are being whipped up. There's one section I was looking for, and I just haven't been able to find it yet. Anyway, I'll find it later. Folks, this is the blueprint here. We're experiencing something closer to a cultural revolution than to a Maidan right now. And that's something I wrote 2 years ago. I wrote that 2 years ago. And I'll leave you with the end of the chapter. I'll read that at least. I'll read the end of the chapter. We saw CNN during the summer of 2017 giving Antifa a free pass, even endorsing Antifa. When CNN saw Antifa, they compared them to the World War II soldiers who fought at Normandy. It's not what's going on. We're not at war right now. There's no war going on within the United States. The United States isn't in a declared war. They're trying to impose a soft cultural revolution on us, the same way that Chairman Mao imposed his extreme cultural revolution in China. And if that happens, I pray for our country. If that happens, you had better be ready. Read about it. Read about the Chinese Cultural Revolution. This is history. This happened. This is real. It happened 45 years ago, and Antifa is still flying the same red flags today. Antifa is holding the flags today that Chairman Mao loved to see his Red Guards flying. Chairman Mao would be proud of Antifa. 4D Warfare, Jack Posobiec. All right? There you go. Front and back. It's a manual. It's not long. It's a manual. It's meant to be a manual to understand. So, folks, yes, that's my book. That's my book. So, if you guys want to check it out, it's out there, Amazon. And so, folks, if you want to understand what's going on, that's the one right there. 2 years ago, I predicted this. 2 years ago, I predicted that we were already in a soft cultural revolution. And now, and then I said, I pray that it never becomes extreme. I said, I pray that it never becomes extreme. And now, with this, there are people trying to exploit the demonstrations, the powder keg of people being locked up, locked down in a sense. Is there a difference between locked up and locked down? I guess locked down is when you're in place. Locked up is when you're in prison, right? So there is a difference. They're locked down, not locked up. So folks, you got to learn about this stuff. You got to learn that America needs to return to the rule of law, because the other option is mob justice. It's the justice of the mob. It's the justice of anger. It's the justice of nihilism. And it's not justice. It's not justice at all. It's not justice at all. So law and order must be imposed in American cities. That's no question, number one. And then number two, there also needs to be a period of de-escalation. There also needs to be a period of de-escalation once the violence has stopped, the rioting and the looters. If you want to go out in the street and protest peacefully, right, that's allowed. That's encouraged. That's what America was founded on, right? Petitioning your government for redress of grievances and peaceful right to assembly. Oh yeah. Oh yeah. That's in our DNA. It's actually in something called the First Amendment, right? And so if you're a conservative watching this and you say you support the First Amendment online, and you say you support the First Amendment online, then are you going to support the First Amendment outside? Or are you going to be a hypocrite just because you might not agree with what somebody's saying? That'd be my challenge to conservatives. That'd be my challenge to conservatives. Now, I'm not talking about the violence. But my challenge to conservatives is to say, if you support the First Amendment online, are you going to support the First Amendment for Black Lives Matter? Are you going to support the First Amendment for people who are standing up for their community? Are you going to support the First Amendment for people who are speaking to their government and asking for better treatment? I'm not saying you got to agree with every single point that the foundation of BLM puts out, but I am saying, do you support the First Amendment? That's what I'm saying. But more importantly, because I think it's more immediate, is that you've got situations now going on where good people like Captain David Dorn of St. Louis, are being caught in the crossfire of this. They're going to be caught in the violence and the looting. And that has nothing to do with the First Amendment. That has nothing to do with the First Amendment whatsoever. And so that's where we need to draw the line, because the First Amendment is absolutely part of our rule of law. But when you go beyond that, you are beyond our rule of law, because that's where the term breaking the law comes from, because it is broken. You have broken that law, right? And that's what I would say to all of these mayors and governors who are not doing what they need to do. You need to step up. And I'll give credit to Governor Tom Wolf. I will give credit to Governor Tom Wolf, who I've been absolutely critical of in terms of his treatment of seniors of Pennsylvania. And I do still agree that he needs to be impeached for that. But at the same time, I do give him credit for calling up the National Guard for Philadelphia. Because Governor Cuomo in New York, he won't do it. And here's the thing, folks. If you agree that you'd like to reform the policing powers of the states and the policing, the execution of policing in the states, then okay, let's do that. Let's work on that on a state-by-state basis. But what's going on now? What's going on now is a war on cops and a war on police. Anyone in police uniform. And that can't stand. That absolutely cannot stand. That absolutely cannot stand. And that's when it's time to call in the National Guard. So they've done that. They've done that in Missouri. They've done that in Pennsylvania. They've done that and obviously in Washington, D.C., where I'm sitting right now in Washington, D.C. I believe Kentucky as well. I'd have to go look for the specific list. Not the point. The point is we have our National Guard to protect us from this type of situation. That is why they are there. That is what they are for. Right? And we have police for a purpose and for a situation. And I would say to law enforcement that I support the power of policing. I support the right of policing. And I think this is smart. But I would say that the best goal is to get away from the us versus them mentality that we're seeing. And I understand, you know, and this is predominantly in cities, because there's been such a hot war in some cases, especially in some of these violent areas of the cities, places like Chicago, places like Detroit, places like West Baltimore, places like West Philadelphia, North Philadelphia, where I went to college. And so my point to that is, let's see what we can do. Let's see what we can do. But at the same time, we can't get into a point where we're doing things like, what are they saying in Minneapolis? They want to disband the entire police department because that paves the way to anarchy. It would actually be anarcho-capitalism. Right? That's ANCAPs. The ANCAPs would love that. Right? Because then it's no rules, just money. Anarcho-capitalism means no rules, just money. Right? So it's private security forces on private security forces, no police. And private security forces means if you can pay for it, or, I'm talking about in a fictional world, of course, but, private security forces like Blackwater being started up all over the place, right? Because people are going to say, oh, well, if they're rich enough, like in the gated communities, right? You're going to have Pinkertons are going to come back, gated communities already have security forces of some, in a sense, but then they're going to get bigger and bigger. At the University of Pennsylvania, the University of Drexel, in University City of Philadelphia, they have one of the largest private security forces in Pennsylvania, in the entire state of Pennsylvania, because they're only a few blocks away from West Philadelphia. And so they end up seeing a good bit of crime down there in University City because of that. And so you're going to see stuff like that with private security forces, private police forces being increased. And think about how universities are, right? University cops. But imagine that for neighborhoods. Imagine that for corporations. Imagine that for industries, right? So major industries already have security guards. Let's talk about, higher. Wait, do we really want to live in that kind of country? Seriously, I don't want to live in that kind of country. I don't want my son growing up in that kind of country, quite frankly. Right? My family came to this country to avoid the violence of Eastern Europe. My family came to this country to get away from the craziness and the wars and the violence and the anger and the killings and everything that was going on in Eastern Europe. Right, so my family was spared the occupation of Poland and the division of Poland in 1939. At least my family that had emigrated at that point to America. But, the other half of my family was still there, and so they did go through that. World War II, and then later the occupation by the Soviets. So occupied by the Nazis first, and then by the Soviets. That's Poland. And so you've got people having those You've got people having those discussions. You've absolutely got people having those discussions. Just reading some of your comments. So that's it, folks. That's simply it. It's do you want to live in a country where you have law and order, or do you want to live in a country where you have chaos, anger, and violence? Because if you get to that point, you either gotta walk off, or you gotta do you've got to enact major reforms. Are we in a fourth turning? We're absolutely in a fourth turning. We're absolutely in a fourth turning. No question. No question whatsoever. We're in it. So how do you get out of a fourth turning? You have to get in when you get into the first turning. When you get into the next stage is the first turning. So once you go through the fourth turning, you get into the first turning. And so at that point, what you're going to see is a return to traditional values. You're going to see a return to legal systems of justice, and you're going to see a return towards, I think in many cases, hopefully, you're going to see a return towards religion. You're going to see a return towards spirituality. You're going to see a return towards believing in a higher moral order. And that's nihilism. That's the fight. The fight is nihilism, right? And so how do you de-radicalize nihilists, and how do you fight against nihilists? Well, that's cause number one. That's fight number one. And really, it's kind of like when you're dealing with an addict, and when someone is an addict, whether they're addicted to drugs, addicted to alcohol, you got to hit rock bottom. You got to hit rock bottom. And it's only when you're faced with rock bottom, when you're faced with yourself at the end of that road, can you make your comeback, can you make your rebound. And so for the people that are on that road, I think rock bottom is coming very quickly. I think it's coming very quickly. Because not all people have powers of perception, have the power of foresight, or have the ability of foresight, or even the capability for foresight. And I'm telling you, I've already started to see some folks that I would normally consider as left-wing starting to say things like, maybe we did go too far. Maybe we did fan the flames too much on this. Maybe we need to pull back a little bit. And I could even tell you about some big names. I can't tell you, but I was told a story by someone who's very, very well known, extremely well known story of someone. This figure, well, I'll just say this, that somebody reached out to them yesterday and apologized that you never would have seen coming. Never would have seen coming. Never was, and it was a leftist, a liberal apologizing to a conservative. And something that you never would have seen. I'm sworn to secrecy on that one, but if they tell this, it's not my story to tell. It's not my story to tell. So if it's not my story to tell, then I'm going to let them tell the story when they feel it's time to tell the story. But you're already starting to see that rock bottom coming. And then the other thing is, the other part that you're starting to see is look at the classic liberals, right? And the libertarians, right? And the folks that aren't necessarily seen as natural conservatives, but you look at the classic liberals, so people who are on the left side of the aisle, right? Who are on the left side of the spectrum, people like Jordan Peterson, people like Dave Rubin, who have, this IDW, they call it, who are starting to say, like the Weinstein brothers, who are starting to say, you know what? There's a problem of radicalization in academia, the institutionalized radicalization, and they've been the ones to say, hold on a second. And you notice a lot of those are Gen Xers, by the way. You notice a lot of those are Gen Xers. And we saw this big fight at the New York Times this week. And so this is all coming to a head because ideals that we all used to share and ground that we all used to stand on together, like the First Amendment, like freedom of assembly, like freedom of speech, all of that is now being attacked. And there are people then who are saying that, you know what, I might not agree with your politics. I might not agree with your beliefs on certain issues, but they're now realizing that they've got a problem to their left, a big problem to their left that's infiltrated and been institutionalized in many of these areas. And so, yes, of course, conservatives have been talking about this forever. Conservatives have been talking about this for 30 years. But now the fact that you're starting to see people on the left side of the aisle that are waking up, I think it's a big deal. I think it's a very big deal. I mean, ever back in Philly? Yeah, I'm back in Philly every once in a while. I haven't been back to Philly since the pandemic started, though, so haven't been back in a bit. All right, a couple of quick questions, and then I got to bounce. So I'm getting out of here. I'm working hard this week, and ready to get my weekend going. But you know I'll still be around, always be available. What are my thoughts on Mark Bray? He's a violent extremist. Anyone who fans the flames of violence is an extremist, regardless of what side you're on, right? Left or right, extreme left, extreme right. That's all extremism. And look, you're talking to the guy that actually restarted the peace movement. You're talking to the guy that led a rally at Lafayette Square Park, right? And you look how important Lafayette Square was. I was there 3 years ago in June, 3 years this month, at the front of the White House there on the north side, explaining that all sides need to come together to disavow violence. I had many conservatives stand with me, but other people in media, Jake Tapper, Chris Cuomo, wouldn't come out, wouldn't take the nonviolence pledge, wouldn't take the pledge. And so now we see violence that's come forward. Now, this weekend will be big. This weekend will be big in DC, no question. No question. This weekend will be big. Are there Marxists hijacking this movement? Yes, absolutely. Yes, absolutely. Now, I see some people falling into the trap or the fallacy that Antifa supports the Democrats, and that's actually not true. So I want to really disabuse you of that. And anybody who is telling you that Antifa supports the Democrats actually hasn't studied the problem set and doesn't understand what Antifa is. Antifa is an extreme anti-government group. Antifa is against Republicans and Democrats. Antifa was going to protest Hillary Clinton if she won originally in 2016. Antifa is a problem for Democrats as much as they are for Republicans. They are a crocodile, right? And appeasement of them will not work. There's a reason Antifa attacked CNN. You saw it, right? Antifa wants to they're an insurrectionist movement that want to overthrow our country. And if you're listening to anyone who is telling you that Antifa are Democrats, then they're just ignorant or uninformed. They're very uninformed. Very uninformed. So that's what we try to do here is the crocodile thing about appeasement. That's Winston Churchill. Come on, you guys should know that. So what we try to do here is facts and evidence. And so politically, I can get why you would want to say politically you'd want to throw out an insult like, oh, you guys are a bunch of Antifa, but it's actually not true. It's actually not true. In the same way, by the way, in the same way that the extremists on the right don't support the Republicans, the extremists on the right don't support Donald Trump, the extremists on the right are calling for a drastic change and pretty much an overthrow of our system, right? Right? So understand that as well, because it's not fair. It's not fair to not pay attention to these groups and to smear your political opponents as extremists if you don't actually know what you're talking about. And you don't actually know what you're doing. You don't actually know what the people themselves are talking about. If you don't know where the lines are drawn, you probably shouldn't even be having that discussion, quite frankly, because you're not an adult. You're not an adult. And you see everything in terms of black and white, and you're just not an adult, right? You have to understand. You have to upgrade your mental model of the world. You have to upgrade the way you're looking at things. You have to understand what's actually going on. Yeah, these are extremists, right? Accelerationists is a new word for extremist, but it's it's the same thing. It's the same thing. And then they say, okay, so I see somebody saying, what about when they give cover to the violence? Well, and see, that's a problem, right? And that's a big problem. You got to call that out. You've got to call out when they are giving cover to the violence. Because when they are giving cover to the violence, whoever it is, and that's what, go back, that is why I talked about the anti-violence pledge. Because if you are giving cover to the violence, if you are trying to, what did CNN run? Antifa is a group that seeks peace through violence, right? What you're doing there is you're justifying it. So you're justifying nihilists to join these fight clubs, and then you're told that if you join one of the ones on the right, well then, that's bad and that's evil. But if you join one on the left, that's okay and that's praise and that's laudatory and that's good. So you're getting these folks who in some cases may not even be political themselves, but they're radicalized from nihilism. They're radicalized nihilists that want to just go out and perpetuate mayhem and destruction, right? No Country for Old Men, right? The assassin in that, in No Country for Old Men. It's just nihilism. It's just weaponized nihilism. And so now you're telling them that if you go to join Antifa, that you'll be praised, you'll be celebrated. You'll be praised, you'll be celebrated. And so what's a good nihilist to do, right? What's a good nihilist to do is, of course, you're going to join that group because the media is telling you that group is the one to join, because if you join them, you'll be praised and you'll be defended, right? So this is the stuff I think about, right? This is the stuff I think about. And so if you don't, so if you don't want people to join those groups, you have to turn it around and say, I stand against all violence. And how hard is that to say? Why is it so hard to say I stand against all violence? Have you heard anyone big who's putting out these videos, and there's all these videos and they're putting up the black squares on social media? But why is it hard to call out the violence? Why is it hard to call out the violence? George Floyd's brother did. Now, I give him credit for that. I absolutely give him credit for that, because he did. What's his name? Was it Terrence? His brother who came out and spoke, he said, my brother wouldn't have wanted this. George wasn't about this. That's what he said. Right? And I take the man at his word. I take the man at his word. Oh, excuse me, Terry, not Terrence. Some people are saying. And so that is what you have to hold people to account on. Disavowing violence, disavowing hate speech, disavowing bigotry. And that includes hate speech against Trump supporters, that includes hate speech against Christians, that includes hate speech against pro-lifers, that includes hate speech around moms, hate speech around women who choose to be full-time moms, right? And there's so much bigotry in the language, right? There's so, and by the way, hate speech against men is right. Hate speech against men. That includes hate speech against men. Thank you. I think Janet just texted that or commented that. So that includes hate speech against men, because if you're against hate speech, then you have to be against all of it, right? So if you're gonna be against it, then why are you gonna use it when it's people that you want? Herman Munster, in the 1960s, he said it doesn't matter if you're white, black, or yellow, or green, because Herman Munster. He said what matters is the strength of your heart and the content of your character. Strength of your heart and the content of your character. And that means you can't use hate speech against someone just for being white or black or yellow or green, like Herman Munster. And I see Serena mentioned that CNN would go against it. No, is that the Washington Post actually, not a parody, the Washington Post actually ran a headline saying that Herman Munster was wrong. They actually ran a headline. They're trying to cancel Herman Munster from the dad on the Munsters in 1965. They're going to cancel him. They're actually, yeah, Serena, yeah, absolutely right. They're trying to cancel Herman Munster for saying we should judge people based on the content of their character. And this is, really? Come on now. Come on now. You're going to cancel Herman Munster. My goodness, no one is safe. No one is safe. So folks, I mean, if you want the moral panic to end, if you want the nihilism to end, you got to batten down the hatches and you got to get ready. You got to promote justice, you have to promote truth, and you have to stand up for virtue, right? And because if we can all agree on those things, justice, virtue, truth, and law and order, right? We want to live in an orderly society, right? We don't want to live in an anarchist society or a chaotic society. Then maybe, just maybe, the fourth turning will end and the first turning of a new cycle will begin. I think that's bad enough for me. And now for the famous words. Ladies and gentlemen, you have my permission to lay ashore.